Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, 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 hey. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Production Tips and Tricks. Today is Friday, January 14th. I'm Steve Knotts, of course. And if you're just coming in, welcome to the crew. This is what we do like once a week. I show you some of the music that I'm working on and what I do to get it through sound design, song structure, mixing, and even out to mastering or pre-mastering, which is what we're doing today. And when I say pre-mastering, it means I'm not actually doing the mastering myself, but I'm going to do everything possible to make the best quality audio file so I can send it to Pivclit at Den Mastering or whoever my mastering engineer is and make sure that they have what they need to make a fantastic Final Pro mix. And they're not going to come back to me right away with a question or come back to me and say, dude, one channel's missing, or you gave me something in mono. Like, there's a lot of dumb mistakes that can happen when you're exporting your master channel mix. And I want to help you avoid those mistakes and just get a better workflow. So this is not going to be like a big compression and EQ kind of a workshop. It's going to be like file management, labeling, organizing, procedures, processes. It might seem like those are boring words to say, but let me tell you, this will save you time and get you a much better sounding track faster. And there are some situations where if you make a mistake at the export and send it off, they might just take it and work with that and not even tell you that you sent them a mix in mono or you had some effect on that you shouldn't have had on. So it's a little bit of a housekeeping workshop, but this is stuff that nobody ever told me. I had to learn it step by step by getting yelled at by other mix engineers or finding out the hard way myself. By the way, we're listening to Randy Adams right now for some intro music. And thanks for coming to hang out. If you have any questions, you can always type in the chat. I'm watching on YouTube over there. And to just show you the part of the process, oh, my export's finished. Okay, cool. You know what? I better. Sorry, Randy Adams. That music is awesome. But let's go into live. We're in full screen. So what do we have? Where are we at? So here is basically a session, a project, a piece of music. And I've gone all the way through. I built the track, mixed it. You saw me in the workshops before, going from sound design, song structure, making sure it has a climax, making sure the mix sounds good. The first thing I want to point out is you can see some markers. And one of the mistakes I see all the time in track feedback is people export their track and they stop where the music stops. Let's just listen to the ending here. Wait, is that coming through? Is that music not going through? Let me check my Ableton outputs. I know what it is. I'm hearing that, but you're not hearing that. So let me just make triple sure. Yeah. Okay, so what I just did was I set my master output to go out a different set of, to go out to the mixing board on a different channel. Had to make sure that was coming through the broadcast. What is Ecamm doing? Not now. Starting off with some unexpected tech surprises, but we got it going. All right, what are we talking about? The mistake people make is they export a mix and they cut off the reverb tails or the decay of the last sounds. So let's just listen to the end of this track. And I want to indicate to you that the MIDI clips and everything stop like here. But when I'm exporting, I drag the loop brace and catch the region all the way past it. So let's just listen to the ending. Watch the master VU meters there, or peak level meters. All that sound, even out to here, I want to keep that going. And I just take it an extra almost 8 bars later, and I drop a marker called end tails, because when you're zoomed out and you're going to select your track, it's easy to look at the little color blocks and think, oh yeah, I selected everything because I got all the visual blocks that I can see, but the tails extend longer. So the first tip that you should always do is drag your region at least 5 seconds longer past the end of what you think the last sound is to make sure you don't clip off those tails. Because if you export a mix where you have the last cymbal crash and a reverb, and then it goes and it just stops, people get dropped off a cliff. It sounds unprofessional. It sounds very obviously unfinished. And the mastering engineer has no choice but to fade it down sooner. So you might lose the last cymbal crash or have a track that just goes and just kind of dive bombs off to the ending. It doesn't have a smooth release into a fade out to let people kind of ride on the end of the track. And of course, if you're DJing and you play a track with a super long tail, you can fade it down whenever you want. It doesn't matter. But the track that the mix that you export should have those details in there, because details are really, really important. And that's one quick tip about what you can do. So before I get into all these other details of exporting stuff, let me show you the end result of what I want to get to. This is a folder called stems, and there's another folder called mixes. So in terms of organizing, make some folders so you know where your audio files are and you can find them. Now, as I was going through track feedback on this song, I had, okay, mix 2, all right, mix 3, mix 4, I added a melody, mix 5 as a prep for probably exporting. And then I clearly labeled these: pre-master 1, 24-bit 44K, pre-master 2, 24-bit 44K. Pivclip was just telling me that you should export at 48K or 96K for some technical reasons about aliasing, or in other words, making sure you can capture all the high frequencies, even above the range of hearing. There's some high frequency content up there. So we'll talk about that in a second, but first, make a container to put your exports. Pro Tools is really good about this. When you open up a new session, they force you to define a folder where you're gonna save your content. And I wanna tell you, do the same thing in live. Make a folder where you have your test mixes. So you can go in here. I could drag all these mixes into a new Ableton project and compare them in an A/B comparison. I could upload them to a SoundCloud playlist or drag them into QuickTime, and I know those are the mixes I want to listen to. Then for the stems, check this out. It has a number 125, which is the BPM, and then just the name of the sound. This is so important, and I had to do something special to make this. The problem is, if you just go and export your stems from Ableton Live, like on the normal export function, what it's going to do is take the name of the project up here, whatever your project is named, it's going to put that first, and then the track name. So you would end up with all of these audio files would say, you know, Jingle Tech Techno 125 BPM project dash crash rack or dash piano or field effects or something. And that makes it really hard, because when you want to drag all those audio stems into a new project to do your stem mastering, all of the channel names are going to start off with this really long string of characters that say Jingle Tech Project 120. And like, as an engineer trying to find the sounds and mix with them, it's going to be really hard. You have to like go to the file name or the track, delete all that extra text, and just get to the part of like, where's the freaking kick drum? Where's the bass? Where's the whatever? So this is something I recommend doing only for the export stage, to rename your project and get a short file name, so we end up with an easy folder. And I can see, all right, I got my effects right here. Those are all labeled. I've got my individual files, and I was just doing this before we started. So here are my individual tracks. Those are like the separate channels one by one. Here are my groups. If I wanted to send this off for like stem mastering, but at a kind of less detailed level, I can just be like, hey, here's my stereo drums, here's my stereo instruments, there's my mono low group. And that's kind of like making the option of like a 3-channel mix or something. And then I've got my effects. So let's do effects, returns, and then I can include these as separate things. So if they sound good, you use them. If they don't sound good, you don't use them. Now, why do I want to do groups or individual tracks or stem exports at all? Well, here's the thing. Let's say I send this off and I exported it one day when I had a head cold and the low end is messed up. Or I exported it in a room with bad acoustics and I thought it sounded great, but the actual mix sounds wrong. What's going to happen is the mastering engineer might come back and say, hey, I can hear this track is done. It sounds great. It feels great, but clearly there's something that went wrong in the mix. Can you give me the kick drum by itself? Let me just fix the kick drum. Or can you give me the kick and the sub and then everything else as a split? So to answer that problem and be ready for it, what you do is export the individual stems. This allows you to remix the whole track later if you need to, without having to have the same Ableton project and plugins and routing and effects and everything. It's like a separate backup. Or if you need some help from somebody in a better studio, maybe you have a friend who's like, hey, bring over some audio. Let's make a mix. I got a new thing. Let's check it out. You can say, hey, yeah, I got all these stems. I got my stereo drums and grooves and everything. And then you can come by and make a simple project that only has 3 or 4 channels in your project, but it has all of the content of your mix. So you can really easily, I don't know, run it through a hardware EQ and compressor, or run it through an analog mixing board and make a new stereo file of your track that sounds dramatically better than what you could export from an in-the-box mix. So there's some really big advantages to understanding how to work with stems, how to export them, what to do with them, and sort of how to separate the most critical stuff. So like I was saying, individual tracks are the 1x1 channels that have my effects on them, but they're not processed heavily at the master level. Then groups are like the buses, drums, instrument, mono, lows. And actually, I should probably take the individual tracks and put separate kick and sub into there just in case. And the effects returns, because maybe somebody has some dope ass effect unit that you want to have on there and you don't want your reverbs, and you want to ask them, hey, can you run this through the Space Echo or whatever? So that's just a look at the end result of what it means to be organized and have your stuff in a place where you can back it up, keep it, use it, share it, and everything. Let's talk about how to get there. Exporting stems. That might be a little boring. Maybe I'll do that last. What do you think? Take a screenshot of that. Let's look at exporting a master. So what do I do to get to the master export? Actually, it's a lot of undoing stuff. So let's kind of like turn on this stuff. And this is some of the same stuff I showed you in the mix workshop. Get this playing. Check my broadcast level. I accidentally hit the volume knob in my push when I was moving something. So when I'm producing, I keep a master channel effects rack in place so I can hear it at a loud level, export a mix that's loud enough to compare to other tracks, and evaluate stuff like sound design and song form, where I'm not even worried about the mix yet. I just want to hear a loud version for comparison. Let me grab this question. Is there a particular way you remove the long file names from tracks? Yeah, well, the first thing is I went to each channel and I labeled it with something short, like risers, instead of just audio track or MIDI file. So you have to name each channel, and then right before I did the export, I went up here, I did a save as to save the project name. Just like that, and I renamed it something really, really short and picked a place to save it so that Ableton would write audio file names using that very short intro thing of the BPM and then the track name. And why did I use BPM? Well, guess what? It's easy to export stems and not tell people the BPM. And then once they have it, they're like, what if I want to add a new part or cut out 8 bars exactly? You know, it helps to have the BPM in there. So I use that as the intro line and then continue it up. So let me know if that helps. So here we got the music playing. Like I was saying, and I said this in the mix workshop last week, I map a couple of key commands to make it easy to just mix. So the first thing is Spectrum Analyzer, that little symbol, whatever that thing is called. I put that on there so I can press that button on the keyboard anytime, get to the Spectrum Analyzer, take a look at what's happening in the frequency range, and just kind of keep an eye on the mix. Then I mapped some scene controls for moving up and down, transport on off, the M key for dropping a marker, which is really handy when you're labeling where you are in the track. And the X key for the utility device. What's that all about? Tell me if you hear that. Should be pretty obvious at this point. That's how I check the mix in mono. It just turns the utility mono on and off, which is super important to make sure you understand if you have any phase problems and where, and then you can trace where they're coming from. So what else is on here for keyboard controls? I mapped the Z key for all my effects returns, which I'm not going to use so much in the mastering part today, or the export part. Whoa. Turn that off. But sometimes you want to listen to your channels and not hear the effect tails. Like I can check, maybe I want to check the peak level of that drop right there, but I don't want to hear all that every single time. So I do like to just map one key to all my effects returns so I can turn them off, get them out of the way when I don't want them, and then bring them in when I do want them. And everything else, so we got Spectrum, and this activates the master channel too. So when I hit that key, it brings me to the master channel so I can see all my other settings. And I think those are the most important ones. To get around, make it easy to find where you are in the mix by looking at the spectrum or seeing your main output settings. As for my master channel rack, got the mono in there. I got a glue compressor that's doing a little bit of gain reduction, a lot of makeup gain, and a limiter. And that's just super rough mastering, so I can export test mixes. So what I'm gonna do right now is turn those two off, keep the mono plug in so I can get to that and use it to check different parts of the mix. We got the master spectrum. Now I have Ozone Elements. Come on. And this shows you, if you haven't used this before, it's like a spectrum analyzer, but it shows you pan position, phase relationships. And to make it really clear, watch this. I click the X key, go into mono, and it shows you the mono dispersion. I'm just looking at this one vector scope. Straight up and down the middle, that's what a mono track looks like. Everything is in the center, or in other words, the left and right are exactly the same. So the correlation is 100%. They're exactly the same. You can see on this meter, correlation meter, when it's up at +1, that means it's exactly 100%. Everything is the same. Let's set up a problem and just show you what out of phase looks like. Turn this on. Instead of doing mono, I'll phase flip one side. Now look how it goes horizontal, and the phase meter is bouncing down to -1, showing you that the track is almost 100% out of phase, or in other words, it's going to cancel out to 0 and you're going to get no sound. And the only parts that sound okay right now are like the kick drum. You can hear coming through. You can hear some of the other beats in the center. You can even see the meter pulsing where the kick is coming in. Kick and the clap are like in the center in phase. Everything else is out to the sides. So if you're on a vector scope and you see stuff really spread out to the sides, and you see that phase correlation meter dropping below 0 down to -1, that's a phase problem that you have to be aware of. Now, you can have effects or synths or a phaser or something that does create a phase relationship that sounds cool, but you really got to be aware of what instrument is doing it, how is it affecting the rest of the mix, and is it causing a problem? Because if you go to your lead vocal and solo your vocal channel and you start getting a wide phase cancellation, that's going to be a problem, because it means the vocal is basically going to be less loud in the mix, and you won't know why. In headphones, it might sound great. In the mix, it collapses and disappears. You got a problem, and you need to know about it. Phase can be deceptive, so that's a really good tool for understanding what your phase is doing and how to keep it going. Yeah, the X key is bypassing the whole utility plug. Give me a yes on mono if you understand the reason why we're checking mono and how to use the Ozone Elements to see it. That's pretty important. While I'm waiting for that, this is where I could use a second monitor. What I'm going to do here is just go through my individual groups. So effects are off. Okay, we're going to focus on the instrument group only. The reason is I know that's the group that has a lot of stereo width, and I want to check the stereo action in the instrument group just to see. And it's a little phasey. Let's get back to something that's happening in the mix. So it looks to me like the main bassline sound is pretty much in the center. The atmospheric pad is the wide one. And some of those effects are kind of wide. So I'm going to let this go. I know it's a little bit phasey. It's dipping down below 0, and you can see visually it's like, whoa, like all over the place. But emotionally, that's the sound I want from that. And if this sound happens to like fluctuate in volume and feel like it's dipping out and coming back up and rising and falling, that would be okay. It's not a lead vocal, it's not a bass line, it's not a kick drum. It's okay if that sound has a little bit of a volume fluctuation, as long as we know that atmospheric pad is the one that's doing the synth phase thing, and it's part of the character of the sound for it to come in and out and sort of like feel like your head is swirling. That's actually what you want. So that's kind of a good example of what we want from phase. Let's go to our drums. And that's me pushing up the broadcast level a little bit. So we can see the stereo drum group has a lot of stereo width, but it's not dropping below 0 at all, which means it's not conflicting with any of the phase. There's nothing that's going to cancel out. You're not going to have waves going opposite and creating like the snare drum evaporating into space or not going anywhere. And then in mono always looks straight up and down, but you want to listen in mono and check and just see, hey, can I identify When you go into stereo, ask the question, what feels like it stays in the center? And when you go back into mono, what feels like it comes back together? And basically, you just want to identify mentally every sound. Can you hear every sound in mono and in stereo? And is your stereo field making a difference? Notice when that riser came in, we got a little bit of a phasey thing just on that riser part, which again is okay because a riser is a temporary sound. It only happens once in a while, and it's not going to really cancel anything else. You can kind of feel it's phasey. So that's, again, part of the character of that sound. It's okay. And if that riser overlaps with like the tail of a crash, it gets kind of warbly. It's like, yeah, you know, it's an effect. It's happening. We're not losing the bass line. We're not losing the kick drum. We're not losing a snare or a vocal or any major part of the track. So phase scope, the low end. Now notice you can see utility coming on and off. Right now utility is bypassed, so the phase meter is showing everything, but it's coming up straight up and down mono, which is something I built already for safety in the mono low bus. With my drum bus effects right there. Just for fun, let's turn that off. Ooh, dirty little low bus has some stereo action, look at that. Where's that coming from? I guess if you want to be super clean, you go to your kick drum, make that mono. Go to your sub bass, make that mono, which I apparently did not do. And then your mono low group. And you know, that's usable. I mean, that's up and down. It's not going to be like a problem. But since we want it to be crispy clean and centered, actually, even more important than just having your kick and your sub be in phase alignment is having them be centered. What happens if you send it to your mastering engineer and this is a serious question. Pivclit, what do you do if someone sends you a mix? The track feels good. It sounds good with good sounds. It has a peak. It has a climax. The mix is decent. Everything is cool. And then you get into your studio and the low end is like 10 degrees off to one side. And you're like, dude, why is your kick drum louder on the left than the right? Especially if, and here's the problem for you as a producer, if your mix is perfect in the stereo field, the synths, the drums, everything in the stereo field has the right pressure. You can see on the meters that the left and right are balanced and it sounds awesome. But then when you look at just the low end, it's like over off to the left. That's baked into the track. The mastering engineer is going to have to do an extra step to split the frequencies, take the low end, pan it back to the center, put the track together again, hope they don't mess up the levels, and do all that kind of like clinical repair work because you didn't check your mono low end. You know what I mean? So these are the things where problems sneak in that you are not going to be aware of listening because you want the track to sound good. You feel like it's good, you're jamming, you hear the low end. You're not expecting it to be just a tiny bit off center, but it can happen. It can happen to you. Don't let it happen to you. So, okay, what did we just do? We went through the three main bus groups, which I always talk about these. I love these containers. It lets you collect all your different sounds into a few compact short places and get a handle on your mix. And then when I'm at this stage, let's say I send the mix to my mastering guy and they're like, hey, you know, can you just bring up the drums a few dB and send me another version? I'll be like, yeah, no problem. -9, crank up the drums, ready to go. That would allow them to make a master without having to ask for all these stems as individuals or group stems as effects in stereo mixes or something like that. Thorium Records. That's Pivclit. So if that happens where you send him a mix with a balanced track and then the low end is off center, answer, I will get it back to client and get them to fix the problem, which means you as the client have to go back in the studio, open that session, get everything loaded up the same way it was, reset everything, and then balance your low end and send a new pre-master. Now, if you're at your house and you work in live in the box, you know, that could be 10 minutes of work. But a lot of times you're connected to other things. Maybe you happen to be mixing in a different studio, or you happen to have a project that you can't reconstruct easily. Maybe it's from a long time ago. You don't remember what you did. Possibly you even mixed it on some hardware analog gear that you can't get access to again. It matters. You know, it makes a difference to get these details right. If you can avoid making those mistakes, it's much more likely that you'll get a great master back fast. And it's possible that if you sent this to a mastering engineer and they're like, this clown is giving me a left-right mix that's messed up on the low end. They're not my people. I'm not even going to take this mix. Go find somebody else. could happen. You might not have an opportunity to work with every single person, but when you show up with professionalism, tracks labeled in order, easy file names, easy to work with, you're sure that they're all there. You're not sending audio files that are flatlined with zero sound. I've had this happen. I've gotten stem mixes where people are like, oh yeah, I got about like 40, 45 tracks. And I'm like, yeah, cool. And I get the folder of audio stems and there's 32 tracks of sound and 10 tracks of flatline nothing. And I can't assume that's nothing. I have to go into the track, take the clip volume, turn it up, make sure that I know that there is nothing on there. Because sometimes tracks do look like, well, not this one, but what I'm saying with clip volume. If you see a track that visually looks like that, maybe it's the person's effects return. And when you add gain and turn it up, you can see, oh, there is a reverb in there, but I had to go in and turn up the clip gain to find it to make sure I'm not deleting something really critical. So a flatline audio file mistake isn't just something I can just delete and throw away. It's like, it might be critical, but I don't know. I have to find out. Takes me more time. And that means you as a client are paying your mastering people more time to go through and deal with mistakes that you should have dealt with yourself. So we were talking about what to look at, how to check stuff, and make sure your track is working. So we just went through the mono switch, basically. I feel so much better when music is on. We looked at some tools on the master channel and how to make sure that your mix is going to sound good and be in phase. So again, none of the sounds drop out and go missing at the critical moment when they should be there. A couple other things I have on here. I have Sonarworks, which I use in my studio to correct for some acoustic problems. You can get the free version of Sonarworks that's calibrated for headphones only. And just in case you're curious, what this does is you analyze with a mic, or it puts in a preset for your headphones, and it balances out this corrected EQ curve. So if my room has a little null or gap where the frequencies are missing there, what will happen is, because my room is taking out that part around 240 or whatever, in my mixes, subconsciously, I would have that boosted up too much. And then people listen to it and they're like, it sounds kind of boxy at 275 hertz. I got to dip that out. In fact, I just shared this track and Shepard's told me like, yeah, it's a little boxy at 260. And I was like, shit. And that's literally a place my room has a problem. So when I put Sonarworks on there, it applies an EQ curve to artificially boost that part of my mix to make me hear that part a little bit louder. So Sonarworks is really cool. They also have this headroom thing that gives you space so you don't blast your ears. I don't always keep that turned on, but you can. And guess what? It has a mono curve, so you can check your mixes. Get them working. Oh my God, my keyboard commands driving me crazy. Which window's active? Okay, you know what I'm gonna do? Since I'm talking a bunch, let's just make a loop so I don't have to keep switching windows. And that's fun for broadcast, but also in the mix process, it helps a lot to loop the loudest part of the track. So when you're going through and comparing your final settings, you know that you're listening to the part of the track where everything is in, all the sounds are happening. It's going to be the loudest part. If your master channel is clean at the loudest part, you're going to be okay for the rest of the track. So these markers are not just for production or song form. They're actually to help you mix and find out. Because the problem could be like, if you're looping a part of the track or you're listening to something that's not the loudest part, you might export a mix that's going to clip your master channel. You didn't realize it. And that can happen, especially if you're doing something like a video soundtrack or a long piece of music, like a 20-minute ambient track. It's easy to forget where the peak is and not check the peak. You want to make sure you're not having any distortion or any overloads. In other words, you want to have a lot of headroom. And at the end of the piece or the performance or the mix, when you get all the way to the ending down here, you should be able to look at that master level and have it be like -3 or definitely minus something. You don't want to see any overs. You don't want to see anything peaking and clipping up to the top. So what I would do is basically when I'm checking level, I'd press stop, go back here, reset the peak level meter, which is called peak level. Then play through the whole thing, go away, don't touch, listen, do your final listening to make sure it's fine. But the point is, you're watching this peak level meter to make sure that no matter what happens in the track, however loud it gets, your main peaks are going to be -9. Pop quiz, what's missing? I just made a mistake. What did I do wrong? Answer. I left my effects off Now, if I were to export a mix and forget that my freaking effects racks are off, what's that going to sound like? It's going to sound bone dry and boring, right? These are little things you got to have almost like have a checklist. So I made some notes on what I do here. Exporting the master. We talked about key map tools to find your way around and make it really easy. So have a spectrum analyzer on the master channel, put a keyboard key on there so you can touch it with your finger and get it in place instead of having to like use the mouse to get around. The utility switch on off to check in mono, effects returns on and off. Spectrum settings. Take a second and grab these settings. These give you fast response and a very accurate setting where the line basically shows you the peak level. It's not jumping up and all and down. It's not on this auto thing where it just moves all over the place, makes the scale move. Keep it off like that. You want to have a range from 0 to minus 180 to show you. It's like zooming out to give you kind of the most usable picture of what the track is doing. Fast refresh rate. I'm not going to talk about what all these mean, but grab these settings because that's a really useful setting for Spectrum Analyzer. For some reason, they don't have that as a preset in live. I don't know why, but I just figured out that's the most useful way to do it. Then we talked about Ozone Elements, checking phase, understanding which sounds it's okay to have a phase problem. Tried to explain what a phase problem is and why it's a problem. We check track group effects, track group phase, and bypassing my master effects channels. And then we looked at Sonarworks, which can help you correct for any problems you have if you're working with weird headphones or an acoustic room. So at this point, I'm happy with the track. I'm ready to do an export. What I'm going to do is drag my loop braces from the beginning to where? End tails. Not the end of the track, not the end of the last color block that I can see visually on the screen, but a good 10 seconds past that, so you have the tails in place. I like to double click on top, see the whole thing. You can even open up the overview if you want to and get a view. Now, this is a little nerdy, but I click on the loop brace. I'm going to look in this bar down here and drop the mouse. You click on the loop brace, drop the mouse right below it until that info pops up of what you're exporting. So it says time selection, start 1.1.1, yes. End bar 181. I visually look up here, looks like bar 181, yep. So the length is 180 bars, duration 5 minutes, 45 seconds. I'm just checking to make sure, am I exporting what I think I'm exporting? What you don't want to do is be, zoomed way in like this and go to start the export process and you actually have like something else selected that's 13 seconds long. And it sounds so dumb, but it's possible to export and cut off your intro or export and cut off your ending or do something weird that you're not expecting. This is not a time to be stressed out and in a hurry. This is like your baby, right? It's like your little like sculpture that you're going to send off to somebody. So now Shift Command R, that's pretty, I think everybody knows that. But for rendered track, I'm going to select master. Again, you have a chance to select your start and end things. Render as loop, no. Convert to mono, no. Normalize, definitely not. You do not want to normalize. You almost never normalize these days. Maybe I would normalize if I had like 50 audio files that were all a single voice for a video soundtrack. Maybe I would normalize them all just to get them all louder by the same amount because it's the same sound, same recording, same day, same mic, same everything. But in general, normalizing is not something you even really need to do. Not going to create an analysis file because I'm not exporting a mix to DJ with or read the lines. Sample rate. Just had a talk with Pivflit about this. I produce at 44.1 from habit going back to sample CDs, I think. And there are some good reasons not to do that. I usually don't use 48K unless I'm recording with mics and I want really super high fidelity, high-end, top detail. But when you're exporting a mix to get mastered, you might want to bump it up to 48 or even 96K. What that does is it moves the high-pass filter to a higher frequency. Even if it's above what you can hear, the higher frequencies in the mix are not going to get truncated or brick wall filtered down. If you work with analog synths, the problem that happens is called aliasing. The first time I heard this was when I was doing an LFO pitch sweep with an analog synth, where I had the LFO mapped to pitch, and as I turn the LFO up, it goes brrrr, and goes way up. Well, when it got to the part above the range of hearing, there was this extra little sound that comes in and goes like wow in the background. It's like a ghost note that's not being produced from the track, but it's happening because the frequencies hit the high pass filter, and the sample rate actually takes 2 pictures of a sound at every cycle. So you get like a doubled image that sounds like a ghost or like birdies or crinkling or crackling or some kind of high-end distortion that's just not good. So when you export at a higher sample rate, you basically avoid having those artifacts that come from overlapping high frequencies. Okay, Piv, thank you. If you would produce a 44.1, then export at 44.1. That's my habit. So I guess what I should be telling you to do is produce at a higher sample rate if you're really into high frequency detail and you want to make sure all those things are coming in. And a lot of electronic music, the sounds we use, I mean, we're focused on bass and everything. We're not recording mics. We're not recording acoustic reverbs or whatever. So I'm going to say I produce at 44.1. I realize there are differences in opinion. And also, this keeps your file sizes a little bit smaller. Next step, PCM, that's making your audio file. We're going to do wave. You could do AF. Bit depth. I want to jack this up to 24 bits. And there's a whole discussion on bit depth. But that's going to make sure that there's headroom and detail on the part that gets exported. Dither options, we're going to leave this off. The mastering engineer should be doing the dithering. In general, the rule of thumb is you only want to dither an audio file once. Dithering is like, you know when people say like you can sleep better if there's ambient noise like the ocean or like a little like fan or something, and it kind of gives your consciousness something to grab onto so you're not just in empty silence? Believe it or not, dithering is a little bit like that, where it adds this super low level of digital noise to make sure that any of your quiet sounds are not getting lost. And then after the export process, it removes the noise again. So it's sort of like a magnifying glass to make sure that the export gets all the details. Don't worry about how it works. There's options on how to do it. You can look into it. The main thing is you don't want to dither your own pre-master. Pivclip, better to set the project to 48K. Yeah, you know, when you start a project, set it to 48K, and then everything will be at 48. 48K is also the standard for video recordings. So if you're bringing in audio from a video or a GoPro or something like that, might help. Lastly, do I want an MP3? Optional. I'm not going to do it. Do I want a video? Optional. No. And then when you go to export, this is where you put in song name, BPM, the word pre-master. I put this in, and I would put 16K. No, what am I saying? 44K, 16-bit, and maybe even Steve Knotts, so that the person who's receiving this audio file, if this audio file ends up on their desktop or a downloads folder or an email or whatever, they're going to be able to go in there and say, aha, it's a pre-master. That's what I'm working with. I know who the client is. I got the BPM. I understand the sample rate, the bit depth. I know what I have. What you don't want to do is put that in there and email that to somebody. Dude, when I was in New York, just trying to press play here so we got some music. You know, you're always walking around the street, in between the subway, whatever. There's always people selling stuff. This dude came up to me with a CD, and he's like, hey, man, check this out. New album is hot, is awesome. And he held out this CD in a jewel case that was completely unlabeled. Not even a Sharpie marker saying, like, hype, whatever. A blank CD. And I was like, bro, what happens? And I told him, I stopped, and I was like, man, what happens if I buy this right now and I love it and I want to find you and come to your show or buy your next album or get in touch online or find you on MySpace or whatever? And he was like, oh, yeah. And he was like so into his own world that he thought his mix was just so great. It was going to be awesome. Maybe he thought I would listen to it and hear him say his own name. It was a rap music. But like, it was just unusable. There was like no possible way I was going to take this blank CD and just try to, it makes it harder for the user, right? It makes it harder for the other person. Or in other words, it makes it easier for them to lose your project, throw it in the trash can, never get back to you. Even what if they want to get back to you and they can't? What if they find this awesome audio file and they're like, I don't know who made that. So again, these are like stupid housekeeping tips, but it's really going to save your butt when you're exporting stuff. And I think those were all the main important settings, right? Master. Yeah, so let's go through 1245. Cool. If you have any questions, let me know. We're going to be done in a second. The next thing I want to show you how to do is export the stems. So first thing is when I'm leaving production mode and going into rendering, exporting mode, I increase the buffer size. This will make your latency worse. So if I'm like finger drumming on push, it's going to be harder because there's going to be latency and my micro timing will be off. When you're doing recording, playing a keyboard, playing a MIDI controller, listening to a mic with the monitoring, you want to have your buffer size as low as possible for recording to reduce latency and get instant response of your sounds, especially with MIDI controllers, whatever. But we're not doing that right now. I want to increase my buffer size, maximize the computer resources that are going into rendering, and basically eliminate glitches. What you don't want to do is render your tracks and find out there's a little glitch in there, which doesn't happen as much anymore. Back in the early days, it would totally happen and you had to increase your buffer size before you export. But I do it still by habit anyway, just sometimes to get things super clear. We're in the Ableton Prefs audio. This is where you could set your whole project to 48K if you wanted to be smart and do that. So anyway, buffer size is up. And here's my little checklist. Channels are labeled. Yep. Markers and tails. Yep. Select region. Yep. Export settings. We'll get to that in a second. Oh, we'll get to that right now. So the problem for right now is I want to do my backup thing. I want to export individual stems so I can send them off to someone else who's going to mix them or do like what they call stem mastering or something like that. So, and I just found this out before the broadcast. I made a mistake and did not select my return tracks. So you want to make sure you're showing your return tracks. Now we're going to open our export audio video menu. This time, rendered track is going to be all individual tracks, which I'm pretty sure is going to include your return effects. I'm not 100% sure on that, so we got to check. Now, what are we doing? Include return and master effects. Yes, that means when you have a channel with effects on it, it's going to send them through. It also means if you have master effects, it's going to go through all that. So I am bypassing everything that affects the sound from my master channel, especially Sonarworks. In fact, let's bypass everything just for technical proficiency. And then like on my sends and stuff, crash rack going up on send A, return A is a drum reverb. That means when it exports a crash audio file, that audio file is going to have this reverb built into the audio file, which makes it easy for you, so you don't have to worry about that. Next up, individual tracks. Render start 176. Ah, I made a mistake. Did I make a mistake? 176. What happened to 181? There we go, 181. Make sure you get your tails. It doesn't matter if you have an audio file that has blank space at the end. Doesn't matter. Fine, no problem. It doesn't matter at all. What you don't want to do is have an audio file that stops short, because you know what's going to happen. The person making the mix at the end is going to have to like go back, find a part that worked, loop it, copy it, paste it onto the end, fix the mistake, make it sound good. You hope they care and actually try to do that. And it just avoids problems. So rendering options include master effects. Yes, render as loop. That's up to you. If you were doing a 32-bar beat and you wanted to export just all the separate sounds in a drum beat, then maybe, yeah, I want to give somebody audio files that are all 32 bars long and ready to loop. Convert to mono, not happening. Normalize, no, dude. Analysis file, maybe if you know you're going to use this in Ableton and you want to have the tracks come in with warp markers or BPM already ready to go, that's why you would do that. But if you're sending analog stems to somebody who's going to run it through a hardware outboard gear, then they don't need that. Sample rate talked about, PCM talked about, file type wave, bit depth, debatable. You could do 16-bit if you want. 24 bit's going to be bigger audio files. No dither, no MP3. And then again on export, here is our whole file. I made a folder for stems, and this is where save audio files. This is where you have a chance, again, to label how the stems are going to be exported. So like I just said, the first time I did this before the workshop, I didn't catch my FX returns. So what I did was I exported those 4. I labeled it with the word FX first, and now I can clearly see here are my 4 returns. They're all in the category of effects, and they're all in this FX returns folder. And I got there by going like this, clear selection. I went 1, 2, 3, 4. Shift click on just those tracks, enter export mode. Now I wanted to do only selected tracks and export. There, now I know I have 4 audio files coming at me. They're all gonna be of the type effects, and they're gonna come out. If I wanted to export only my drums group, I could say drum, like that, as short as possible, and then Ableton's gonna create a whole folder or a whole list of files that say DRM/snare, DRM/kick, whatever your channel title is inside Live is gonna be the file name. And I don't wanna actually do that, but I'll show you again. This really matters when you go to drag your stems into new blank channels in a blank project. You don't wanna see a whole bunch of clutter of the project name and everything else. You just wanna see what's the name of the track, what sound is it, what do I need to do to start mixing it? Oh, Thorium, I'm amazed with how many tails I have got to fix. I'm glad you said that because it's something we see in track feedback all the time. People are exporting mixes that actually sound ready to master. They sound great. And then we're like, oh, dude, you dropped us off a cliff. Let me see if I have any other notes for you. Export stems. We talked about buffer size, labeling your channels. That means up here, you know, kick drum, sub bass, super clear. Just get to the point, label it with one word. Markers, end tails, select region, export settings, render track all, return effects, master effects, sample rate, bit depth, project name, export for file names. And we did individual select tracks. So those are basically the things you go through to export a mix that is going to come out ready for mastering and easy to send off to somebody else to work with. And since we have a second, let me just save that. I'm going to go through the process of what I would do when I'm receiving a pack of stems. If you have any questions, type them in right now. Type them in right now. Talking like a teacher. There's always a little time lag before I see your questions. And the spinny ball. Say your prayers. Upgrade Mac Mini soon, because this laptop is fantastic in every way, as you can see, blazing fast. All right. This is like my template, but let's not do this one. That's a production template with MIDI files. So let's say I open up a brand new blank project, and what I want to do is get these sounds in here. I would love it if these all had numbers on them so I knew how many tracks to create. But let's say I want to create, I don't know, like 16 tracks. That was Command T. Just create a bunch of tracks, 23, 24, whatever. That's insert audio track, Command T. Now I've got my tracks ready. What am I going to do next? What's a BPM? Oh, 125. Thankfully, the person put it in there. I seriously, like, never in my life gotten a project where they told me the BPM. I always have to ask. And now there's, this is pretty dumb, but it might help you. I'm going to drag these all in. You can select all and drag them in as one batch and split them out across, or you can take them one by one. If you already know your style of production and you know how you want things laid out, you could take them like kick drum, drag it in, sub bass, drag it in. I've done that before, but it's easy to miss one. So I just I make sure I got them all, drag them over here, and I'm going to hold down Command to make one audio file on every track. I don't want to drag them in and have every audio file stacked vertically in one channel. I want to have them all dragged so they come across. Got 18 audio files, and then even while they're still processing, I select all these, and I want to drag them into the arrangement so I can see the track, figure out what I'm looking at. Quick little workflow tip is scroll up to the top of the screen so you can drag audio file 1 into track 1. These are little workflow tips, but they do matter. Now watch this. I selected all the tracks, click, hit the tab key, drag. I'm holding down the mouse right now, and then let go. That's a little key command that's really easy. You can also select all these and do copy, come over here, put the cursor where you want, and paste. Those are just technical operations. That might sound like super basic for you, but the point is we want to end up as quickly as possible in this kind of situation. Now check this out. I can go down here. I see the name of the audio file. I know what sound it is. It is so annoying if those are not labeled and you're just looking at waveforms. You can figure out what are the big loud ones and what are not, but like some of them, it's not clear. Now, I'm not sure what the template has in here. Output goes to master. Let's set master to 11 and 12 just because for me today that's what's working. Another detail you might want to do is get rid of this audio from. If you're monitoring your external input, then anything that shows up at your audio interface inputs, Ableton is going to do processing power to convert it from analog to digital if you have anything plugged in at all, which is a waste of your processing power. So I like to select all my channels right from the beginning, go to no input. And you know where that matters actually is when there's a default setting of the input coming from the built-in mic. When it's set to the automatic thing, you'll see a little green meter bouncing all the time from the mic in your computer picking up room noise, which you're never going to use, but it's making your computer do that conversion from room noise analog to digital audio on every one of those tracks. What if you have 50 tracks and you're constantly running processing power to like make 50 times conversion for no reason at all? So set that to no input, make your life a little bit easier. And then what I'm going to do is start looking at these channels and making my groups. And even this is a little bit crowded because we have the channel number and then the number 125 and then the sounds, but like sub bass with a small session, drag it over. Parrish, what are you saying? Is Ableton Live good with the new Apple M1 chip? I don't have an M1 chip, so I can't say for myself. I've seen good reports about it, and I've also seen people say wait 6 months because the M2 chip is coming out. And actually, that's a research project I'm going to be looking into because this winter I'm thinking of how to upgrade to something newer that's going to be future-proof as much as possible. Let's keep that conversation going because I want to learn more about Mac Mini peripherals, maybe 32 gigs of RAM, I'm guessing, because I'm at 16 now and it's all right, but I'd rather have 32. And then how to get the most bang for the buck, basically. So at this point, I've got my stems. I'm going to start dragging them in order to find out what sounds I want to work with, to put them in groups. Just like when I was producing, I keep my low end together so my kick and sub are ready to go. And let's have some fun here. Turn my monitor level down. Let's just jump in and take a listen. All right, and there's the mix. Now at this point, you might be happy and think you did it right. You didn't do it right. You didn't do it right until you go through every single channel, listen to every single audio file, make sure nothing got corrupted, nothing has glitches, nothing has weird random background noise that you didn't expect, and just verify that you have the sounds that you thought. In fact, you know what I would like to do also is reference to mix. To really be precise about this, when you are the producer exporting stuff, along with all these, I would put in the folder my pre-master and tell them with an email, hey, here is my folder of stems. Here is my reference mix. Your job is to take these stems, make it sound better than my mix. And that's cool. You know, like sometimes there are audio files, you wouldn't believe it. Sometimes people export like a 6-minute track and then half the audio files are only 4 minutes long. And you're like, well, do they start at the beginning or do they come in the middle? And people might actually select audio that starts at 1.5 minutes and they export it from there because they thought that's where the audio is supposed to be. You get these things sometimes. And the solution is to take the reference mix of their version, listen to it, and that'll tell you where the tracks are supposed to come in, how to synchronize. Basically, it's a sync problem. So you can identify which sounds are supposed to be there, which ones are not. Live still runs on Rosetta on M1. I'm not sure what that means, but something to learn. So whoever's watching right now, 3 people, let me know if this is helpful and useful. I know it's kind of techie and kind of nerdy, but it's a question that people ask all the time. How do you export individual stems, or how do you get your track mastered, or what do you do? And I've written some things with like a checklist of things to look at, but I want this video to have a longer shelf life so people can refer to it later and look at what's happening. So that if someone says, hey, I want PivClit to master my track at 10 mastering, what do? I'll be like, bro, don't fuck up. Go here, watch this, do this checklist, give him what he needs so he can do a really good job right away and not be frustrated and annoyed, and you get good results right away faster. And it speeds up the whole process. It gives you a better result, makes everything work. It is good, clean process. Thank you, Paris. I'm glad you're showing up, man. It's nice to see you in here. It's about 1 o'clock, so if there's any last questions, you can let me know. I think this workshop was awesome. Oh, and for anybody who's watching in replay land, I'm starting to make a lot more of these little cheat sheets and things available. So this is my Gumroad site. There's something called the 10-step Mixdown guide. This is something I wrote, which is a general overview of what I do in the mix process. So for example, if I got a bunch of analog audio files, this is what I would do. I would go through each one, check for low frequency content, think about dynamics, compression, EQ, stereo field, level, effects. It gives you an order of what to do, and it helps you avoid rookie mistakes. Like for example, don't start off by playing with your reverb for 3 hours. It might be fun. You'll enjoy it. It's a fun thing to do, but it's not the first step of mixing. You got to get your mix sounding really good first, and then you get your effects coming in. In other words, don't try to fix a crappy mix by adding tons of reverb. People do that, and it's not the right way to do it. So it's a free download. All you do is click in 0, or if you feel like donating $99 million so I can buy a quadcopter and come visit you in person, just type in 0. And you can download this instant download PDF file, and I'm going to follow up with an email. You get an automatic email with pro tips on how to use each step of the guide. So for anybody who's starting out in the world of mixing and you're confused and you spend 12 hours and you don't get a good sound, this will actually give you a process you can use for your whole entire life. It's like the basic overview of what you do in order to arrive at a polished, professional sounding track, which you can then export a pre-master and get it done. The last thing I wanted to say, if I can possibly go back to that master workshop, save changes, no. The last little thing I want to help people avoid is don't over-process your own tracks. Specifically with compression, it's really easy to jack down your thresholds, crank up your makeup gain, hit the limiters, and feel louder in your room and be like, yeah, it's slamming, it's banging, it's loud, it sounds great. And then you give it to the mastering engineer and they're like, it's overcooked. It's burnt. You burnt the toast. Like, you can't undo it. When you're mastering, when you're trying to master a stereo file, if the person who made it already compressed it to death 100 times, like with no hope for the future, they can't fix that in mastering. So part of the exporting, we didn't have time to do all this in detail. If I go to my drum mix, right? Okay, here's my drum mix. If I look at my drum group compression and I see some nonsense like this, and the person's like, "Oh yeah, I was doing some New York parallel compression," and they're putting it up like, 10-1. If you have a stereo drum group or even a drum loop or something like the important part of your drums that's getting smacked that hard, you hear that? Like, it's conceivable that you would think that sounds good in production. It's louder, it's hitting hard, it's punchy or whatever. But if you send that to somebody for mastering, all the attack transients are cut off because the attack time's too short. The dynamics are squashed to death, and tonally, I mean, it doesn't give them any space to move. And once that drum group is printed inside the instruments in your stereo mix, they can't do very much to repair it. I mean, you could use like an expander or recompress it with longer attack time. That's getting into like reconstructive surgery that you don't want your mastering person to do on your mix. It's much, a million times much better to go light on your compression or even not compress it at all. I think a mastering engineer who receives a mix, they would rather get something totally raw and uncompressed that they can easily work with and make it sound good, instead of trying to fix your mistakes when you burnt it and overcooked it and compressed it too hard and EQ'd it with too much boost and all this crazy stuff that they have to go in and fix. You know what I mean? I think you guys understand the concept. So in the cooking analogy, like if I'm going to buy a can of tomatoes to make into soup, I don't want a ton of salt and pepper and chili and other stuff in there. I want to add my own salt. I want to make sure I don't put in too much pepper. So like if you're thinking about sending somebody ingredients, don't send it to them with like a bunch of hot sauce dumped all over it. Let them do the hot sauce for a little food analogy. So thanks for hanging out, everybody. And if you're watching in replay land, you can always email me, steve@mixedtexture.com, or find me on Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, and check out the downloads. There's some really cool, useful things you'll find at the Gumroad site and the Mixed Texture members site, which is courses.mixedtexture.com. And all these courses have really cool intro preview sections with teaser modules that show you stuff like, videos on what you need to do to get started, or what are the basics, like the teaser, terms and tools, that kind of thing. So that's a few places you can play around to get help to make your track sound amazing, and then join the track feedback crew on Discord to come in and share your mixes, get some feedback, get them sounded finished so we can buy them on Beatport. That's what it's all about. I'm Steve Knotts. I'll see you all tomorrow for track feedback tomorrow on Saturday. It's always fun. We hang out, we talk, we chat. It's like a little family reunion once a week and hear updated mixes. So that's what's going on. If you have any questions, I said that 100 times already, right? Yeah, cool. Have a great weekend, guys. See you tomorrow for track feedback.